Welcome back to Genetics in the Paddock. I'm your host, Emily Johnston, and I'll be taking you along on my journey to learn about all things genetics in extensive livestock. Livestock genetics has always been a topic that's interested me, and now working in the genetic space, it's fascinated me even more with just how powerful of a tool it can be. And I'm surrounded by so many knowledgeable people who are so willing to share their insight, so I thought, why not capture these conversations on a podcast that we can all learn from? In this episode, I spoke with Sam Walkom, a senior research fellow at the Animal Genetics and Breeding Unit in Armidale. He offers some insight into a new upcoming project using the merino resource flock, ensuring they capture the latest traits. So you want to stick around for this one, and with that, let's get into it. Sam, thanks so much for joining me today. I'm really looking forward to having you on the show and having a bit of a chat with you.
It's a pleasure to be here. It's nice to get into the recording studio after all our conversations.
Yeah, there has been a few, hasn't there?
Yeah.
So I'll let you do the honours and just introduce yourself. So what's your role at AGBU and kind of what are some of the industries you work on and just like who are you as a person? Give me all the juicy stuff.
So I am a senior research fellow, I think is the official title. Might be a little bit wrong, but effectively I work as part of the larger AGBU team, primarily in helping the R&D behind the sheep genetics breeding values. So a lot of my work is spent on helping develop new traits, develop resources in regards to genomic databases, new developments, improvements to the analysis, improvements with extension with the sheep genetics team. And then, in the spare time, having a little bit of a play with some beef data and helping that team. So I think when I was asked this question 2 days ago in a meeting, a bit of a jack of all trades across all the species and all the sort of texts, but basically just trying to make sure that the knowledge continues to rise and we get better every day. So, where I can help, I help.
I love that.
It's a bit of a hard one to, say this is what I do, because I try and get across everything as much as I can and build my skill set and make the industry better as much as I can.
I feel like that'd be really interesting too, like working across so many different industries, because you get to see a lot of different things that are quite similar but might be done different, like in different ways or with different concepts or just, I suppose, as an industry standard. But it'd be really interesting just to have a look at all of them, because I'm sure you have a bit of a comparison in your mind when you're working with all these different ones as well. Yeah.
I think we always see differences when we look at industries, and I'm not saying there isn't, but I think the underlying there is a lot in common and a lot of learnings that are made in either species or industries or research groups can be taken up by others, and they're always going to be modified to suit the system in question, but a lot of learnings come across nicely across all species and groups. And I think that's why I've enjoyed working across them, because you don't always have what you need. Say in the sheep, I recently presented a paper at AGBU on reference populations, and I had a question and I couldn't quite answer it with the sheep data I had easily, but the Angus sow benchmarking program was a beautiful data set to play with to give me the lessons I learnt to solve my question. And so I was able to do the research in cattle to answer a question that is going to be valuable across all species, but I didn't necessarily have the answer straight away in the sheep data set. So I guess that's my philosophy, is we can learn from everyone, and how do we access that as quickly as we can? So
I think that's a really interesting approach, and it's awesome that you have the opportunity to do that here at AGBU and just work across all different species and all different industries with all different data sets. It'd just be amazing just to have a look and just, I guess, get the big scope of what's going on in the whole genetic evaluation system across the country, the state, internationally, just have a bit of a look at what's happening around the place.
Yeah, we are very blessed to be in AGBU, and the relationships AGBU has developed with other groups allow us to have that interaction, to get buy-in and permission from them to utilise their data. Like we don't own their data, we have access to it as a result of putting research questions to people and getting access to it. So, it's relationships that have been built from this building, and having sheep and beef and pigs and trees and bees and all that in a building. The skill sets of the building and the relationships of the building with other people is really beneficial, and we can work across groups so that everyone gains from that research output. So it's helped Angus when they probably never thought they were going to look at that, because it's something I had a question for sheep project development. So I think that's the advantages we have, and it's a great place to be, and why I've stayed here in some ways, not being a local armadillian.
So how long have you been at AGBU for now?
So surprisingly, I ticked over 9 years earlier this year, which is a bit of a shock to me. It's flown very quickly. I think the COVID years helped that, because that seems like 2 months, but really it was a bit longer than that. But yeah, so 9 years working across sheep, beef, goats, bees, the whole lot. So.
Yeah, nice. So where did this all start for you? Like, were you just born and you were like, genetics, it's me? Or like, how did you figure out this is where you wanted to be?
It is a weird pathway when you start stepping all the way back. It's always felt like a logical pathway for me, but I grew up in Adelaide CBD. I do not have an agricultural family background in the close generations. I later found out long generations back we came from farmers, but definitely not impacting my lifestyle or lifetime in any way. And I grew up, as all kids do, passion in sport and art and all that sort of stuff, not really ag. And then probably at the end of primary school, I had to make a shift to go to a high school, and I didn't want to go to my local high school because it was a bit of a rougher high school and I didn't really fit in with that group, so needed to find another opportunity. There was a high school in Adelaide called Erbray Agricultural High School. Some people know what that is, probably not from the eastern seaboard, but anyone in South Australia knows what it is.
Yeah.
And it's basically a high school with a focus primarily on agriculture. It's in the middle of the CBD. You have to apply to go there, and it's targeting kids that have an interest in agriculture. So unashamedly, I applied for that without a great desire to be a farmer or anything like that. So, maybe they picked the wrong person, or they saw something I didn't. Went there, started year 8, sat at a table with some year 8 kids. They started high school, and one of them had brothers in what was then the sheep club, and he was going there at lunchtime and I went there at lunch, and it's just by happenstance that I just found a passion for it. Probably didn't realise I had, and really appreciated that, and just all through high school really targeted those ag-based, science-based subjects. Really loved that. Went to uni to do ag science, and then I think I can pretty much say that it was in second year in livestock production and the genetics courses with Wayne Pitchford out of Adelaide Uni, just hit a box, and it just made sense to me.
Knew.
Genetics made sense. It was it just worked for me. It made and answered questions, and since then I pretty much haven't looked back, and that's just where I've gone. So it's really, every day I'm learning something new. That's kind of the advantage of coming from a non-traditional pathway, is because you're just learning every day. You talk to someone and you're learning something you never thought about, and to me that's just one of the joys of being in this position, is that I'm developing skills that are helping other people, but at the same time they're providing me with knowledge I didn't know I existed, and so I've always got a passion to continually learn more, and I think that's why I've really enjoyed it.
Yeah, right. And it sounds like this would be the perfect environment to learn more, as you said, like working across so many industries and just having so many people around you who are just amazing at what they do, and just always, trying to help others and educate people where they can, or just have a discussion in the hallway. Like, I find so much comes out of just a hallway discussion and just having a chat about all these different things. But I love hearing that, you did ag science and you found your unit and you were like, yep, that was it. Because I remember I did ag science as well. And there's just so many avenues in agriculture. It's insane.
Yeah, I must admit I've gone down a very, very niche pathway. We are a unique community. It's a good community. But yeah, it was, if you sat me down as a 12-year-old and said, this is where you're going to be living on the other side of the country, spending your days doing computer modelling and mathematics to help solve agricultural questions. I don't think my inner self would believe me. I think at that stage I still wanted to play cricket for Australia or something stupid. But
that's awesome. What an evolution. I love hearing your story, because as someone who doesn't have an ag background myself, it's always so cool to hear other people getting into ag and building up from the ground as well, and just finding it, and you're just like, wow, I never knew this was me, but it is.
Yeah, I think coming back to that, being around people, I think maybe there is a bit of it's a daunting fear to make that step, but for the most part, the people I've been able to interact with have been amazing and provided opportunities and willingness to be a part of it. So I can't. From people who have not had that traditional ag background, just jump in. What's the worst that's going to happen? You get a job as a quantitative geneticist in Armidale.
Hey, that's not a bad thing.
No, it's a very good thing. But you just don't see where it is. Take an opportunity and it can take you anywhere.
That's really good advice. But speaking of genetics in Armidale, what's happening in Sam's world in AGBU? What's happening at the moment? What sort of projects are you working on? What's happening?
Plenty. As I said, I'm primarily starting to move into a leadership role, working with the team here to help support the core evaluation out of OVIS, and in particular the research areas around that, or how we can expand our offerings. I have just recently set up a project to sort of tackle the genetics of shedding, how we can help those that are choosing to move away from woolly sheep into shedding. What are some genetic tools? Can we help them with that? I've also, I think you're going to talk to Andrew Swan, we have or going to, about sheep object and that's role. And so we done some really nice work with him on the merino indexes, which are now have been released as research indexes and will be shifted over in 2024. So there's a heap of work we did there. We'll do maternals now, so a lot of breeding program industry indexes work as well. I'm now working with Daniel Brown and Julius Vanderwerth from UNE to bring forth the next iteration of the sheep resource flock. And so that's a bit of a project development role at the moment, but we are basically looking to rebuild that and take the next step into the next set of traits. Where do we go next? Where do we build the next genomic reference?
Okay, so for those who have never really heard much about resource flocks, what is a resource flock and what's the benefit of it, and why is that something that you're interested in at the moment?
I'll try my best to
3 questions in one.
Answer it, but the reference population idea has really come around as a result of this shift in capacity to utilise genomics. Historically, quantitative genetics have relied on a pedigree-based relationship between animals, and that has allowed us to understand gene flow through the breeding decisions of which size got used, and we expect their progeny to resemble them genetically because genes gets passed down from parents to offspring. And that is how a lot of breeders interact with sheep genetics and breed plan at the moment, using a pedigree model. As technology has come along, we've been able to actually, I suppose, describe the genes that we see within an individual better through the use of a SNP, chip and genomics. And so that then goes, well, you don't actually need to have that father, mother, progeny. You can start to understand how a gene performs if you have a patch of your genotype that's very similar to another animal in the reference. And so it opens this box of opportunities. If you can model how genes perform for traits, then you can screen an animal using genomics and go, okay, well, this is the genes that they carry. We expect them to perform like this. And so we give a genomic prediction. And to be able to do that accurately, you need to have a large reference. I'm saying large because that's a good term, but it's a grey what large is. Yeah. But a reference that describes all the gene types and the representation in the population with a performance next to it. And we saw a need to do that, and that's how reference populations were formed. The sheep CRC was basically the cornerstone of the sheep reference population, and they established that. And Julius has been and will continue to be one of the key drivers and, godfathers of that project. That's not the right term, but, get the point.
Yeah.
And, so we're just looking at, that's why I'm working with him to just build the next iteration, because you continually need to be renewing that because the genetic pool of the population evolves. And so as new combinations of genes or types or silines come in, you need to put performances against that to get a guide. And that's about my most simplistic way of describing it. But if you want to have a prediction of how a pool of genes perform, you need to have a reference somewhere else that shows what those genes can do. And so, it's always the long-term goal of genomics is that a commercial breeder, or let's just say a breeder, can go and take a sample of the DNA of their animal, and then with a hopefully one day, high level accuracy, be able to predict what those genes will be capable of doing and make a breeding decision. Making that jump takes a bit of time, and as geneticists, that's where we'd love to be. We'd love to be able to do that. To do it at an accuracy that breeders can make long-term decisions about takes time, unfortunately. And so I don't see that necessarily becoming how we do breeding in sheep and beef for a very long time. But I think we're getting very close to providing commercial tools to commercial breeders to really be able to benchmark their animals and at a reasonable accuracy, not a given accuracy. I'm using accuracy in regards to how people think about it, not how we use the term in quantitative genetics, but I think that's the way we can get to. And so that's what we would like to do.
So you were saying a bit about like how genomics can be used to make those decisions. So I guess that also would come into play as you can, because an animal, like the DNA is set at conception, as soon as an animal hits the ground, essentially, if like the world was perfect and you had all of this data recorded on performance and genomics on the reference population, you could essentially get a prediction of what this animal's performance is going to be like from birth.
Yeah. So if we think about the current breeding programs, the moment you put a sire with a dam and they get a progeny, we would comfortably, I think everyone can happily say that we expect that progeny to be, on average, half the performance of the dad and half the performance of the mum. So instantly, the moment those two animals are joined and you know that they are conceiving and producing an offspring, we know through the use of breeding values, you could make a prediction of that performance of that progeny. But it's not overly accurate. We just expect them to be the mid-parent. You don't know which bit of the dad they got. Was it the beneficial bit or the unbeneficial bit? Yeah. And you don't know with the mum. But on average, if you mode across your progeny, you expect to be 50-50. And then as that animal grows up, you start to record them for traits and you get a better picture. So you might get a birth weight and instantly you know it was heavier or it was lighter. So based on what we see from the parents, you get heavier, so you expect them to be probably carrying more of the better genes. And then weaning, they're heavier again. Probably compared to the contemporaries, that's doing better. And over time, you record more, you get more accurate. So everyone utilising breeding values is probably observing this. Over time, the breeding values of the animals in the current drop become more accurate because we get more information on them. And nothing really beats having a record on an individual. Like, we can all see that in ourselves when people are like judging us. We're like, well, this is what I've done. You can see me, I can run 100 meters in X time. And it's when you say that, people are like, oh yeah. Whereas if they just look at you, they might over or underestimate you. And so that's what we're doing. The advantage of genomics is it's giving us an understanding earlier on in the animal's life of information. It's just adding a bit more. And so we can then go, oh, okay, it has got the good genes from dad or the good genes from mum, and we expect its performance to be better. And so it's just early on providing us with a boost in our confidence of what that animal looks like. And so, for example, with a trait that takes a long time to get a performance record on, say if we look at meat science in sheep, which has been the dominant trait of interest in the resource flock in the history, to get an understanding of an animal's quality as genetically for meat, we need to grow it out to become a sire, then have it as a sire having progeny, kill the progeny, get them in the carcass record, and then feed that back to the sire who we're going to use as make a mating decision on. So you could kill the sire, but the moment you kill him, you can't breed from him. So that's that 2-year thing. And so you're potentially looking at 2.5 years before you have a really confident accuracy on a sire. And that slows down your genetic gain because you can't make the pull. Whereas with genomics, if the reference population is like the genomic accuracy is good enough and that's built from a reference population, we can come in and say much earlier, so post-weaning or a young animal, and we go, look, it's not the equivalent of having 10 progeny, but it's a hell of a lot better than having nothing. And so when we make our decision, we've improved our accuracy of decision. And so we're more confident out of that pool of sires we're picking from that we pick the right one because we have an improved accuracy or confidence in that breeding value. And so that's where genomics really opens up opportunities, is it improves our accuracy of selection at a younger age for traits that are harder to measure. Weaning weight, genomics provides very little because you can get a really nice accurate measure on that animal and its brothers and sisters well before selection.
Yeah.
But it's those hard to measure traits, late in life traits, that genomics has huge value to improve the accuracy of selection.
And it sounds like there's a lot of advantages to genomics, and even I was just thinking as well, like you can't measure milk traits on a bull, so you don't know, exactly like sex-linked traits as well. But speaking about traits, so we're like going back to the resource flock idea, are there any kind of traits that you guys are really interested in recording and getting more information on to kind of speed up the process? I know there's a lot of talk at the moment around sustainability and all of that sort of stuff. So what are you thinking for those sort of traits? Or is it just as many as you can and all of them?
It's a bit of that, but I guess the early iterations of the resource flock under the information nucleus flock name in sheep CRC was very much let's do everything. And that model was good, but it's very expensive and it got reduced. And so the resource flock, funded by MLA, really focused on meat traits. And we've built a very good reference for that, but it needs to continually be renewed and refreshed. So we're going to continue doing that focus on meat, except we see value in other things, and in particular the breeding flock, so to speak. And so this new resource flock, we are aiming to step out back into this recording on reproduction traits and looking at repro a bit more intensely than what we would see on farm. So really, as a result of having the component repro analysis, we can get more information on ewe rearing ability, conception and litter size, but then you add on to things like maternal behaviour score, lambing ease, lamb survival instead of just having it at the ewe, and many more. And then also, like, how well is the ewe performing? What's it doing in regards to weight loss? How much energy is it using? Do we have more efficient ewes that are maintaining weight and producing bigger lambs? So efficiency around the ewe sort of comes into that sustainability concern, is like, can we produce an animal that produces more for the inputs? So better understanding about that. And then I guess I'll say the elephant in the room is methane, and really the resource flock will be setting up a platform to build a methane reference. And I think at the moment it is probably now our hardest to measure trait, other than feed intake, but those two come together. So it is definitely our hardest to measure trait at the moment, and so asking producers to capture it like they capture weaning weight is going to be very difficult at this stage. And so that is our new build that reference starts stuff going. So that's probably where we sit.
Okay. And I suppose like those reproduction traits as a whole are so important for reproduction, because without reproduction, the cycle doesn't continue and you're not actually producing. So yeah, that sounds like a really, really interesting area, and I'm sure a lot of producers will find that really beneficial, the work that you guys are putting into that. And so is the goal, like with the methane, because you were just saying like it's probably one of the hardest to measure and you wouldn't expect a producer to measure that on farm. So going back to when we're talking about genomics, is that kind of the idea, is that you'd measure methane on the resource flock and those animals would have their genotype and performance for methane recorded? And then if an animal's related to that, technically a producer or a breeder could just do genomics on that animal and get an estimate for methane. Is that kind of the hope for that kind of space?
I think if we think really long term,
yeah,
we'd have a pathway for people to record methane on farm. But we aren't there. And so we need to work on pathways to get to that. And so at the moment, we'd like a reference population to exist where producers put in a representation of their genetics into it. We go through the harder work of getting the phenotypes on it and capturing methane, which would then, as that population of recorded animals grows, we build a genomic reference that reflects the industry and the genetics of the people who want to make selection decisions on methane. As that grows, the ability for the genotypes on unrecorded animals back at their flock to produce a genomic prediction or a genomically enhanced estimate of methane will increase. And so over time, as the reference population grows and its relationship with your flock at home increases, the value of that genomic prediction improves. And so maybe in the initial parts when the data is quite low and the accuracy of those predictions is quite small, let's say just, oh hell, that SI is really, really bad.
Yeah.
Maybe all the other advantages of that SI are outweighed. It's a lower accuracy, but I can find another SI that's pretty good for all the other stuff, but is also better for methane. And so that early decisions like that. But over time, we'd love to get to a position where it could sit comfortably in a breeding objective, if we're in a position where that is. I don't know how methane is going to impact bottom lines and operations and the need to, how it sits in a breeding objective yet. That's not clear, but we need to be in a position to be able to do something. And that's the point of this exercise, is to build the reference so that when the time comes, the decisions have to be made to incorporate breeding or methane production into breeding objectives. People have the tools available to them. So it's definitely a way of looking at the resource flock as a way of future-proofing the industry for traits that we don't necessarily get paid on at the moment, but in the future will allow us to shift or move our product in a direction to respond to industry demand.
That's really interesting. It sounds like the whole project as a whole is just going to have such a big impact with driving the industry forward, especially with some of these new up-and-coming traits. And when you were talking about that as well, I was just thinking that some of these traits might also be really expensive to measure. So like the cost of actually measuring that trait, and then, you know, if you guys are doing all the work for them, essentially, and then having that reference population there, it might also be cost effective sometime in the future, as well as, you know, time efficient.
Yeah, I don't know.
Not as much.
I don't know how you talk about costing, but yeah. Like these traits, they are hard to measure for multiple reasons. They're hard to measure because it takes time. So repros are hard to measure because it takes time. You have to go out into the paddock, but you probably also need to do that several times. You like to see the ewe produce several litters, so you have confidence because it's a lowly heritable trait. And then there's other measurements like carcass data. It's just costly because you need to go through a processing plant. You need to have technicians in the lab to make sure that the carcasses are correctly identified. You need to take a sample back to a lab. You need to run it through a chemical process to get IMF. You need to run it through a machine to get a shear force measurement. You're just adding time and cost, and so those are quite costly. At the moment, methane's going to be costly as well because we don't have a lot of technicians and tools, and in sheep, at least at the moment, it's a chamber-based measurement, and so that's a costly thing. And so, you know, as an industry, you see that, and everyone can weigh an animal, but things are hard for different reasons, sometimes financially, sometimes just purely a time-based thing.
Mm-hmm. So with the resource flock, we talked a bit about how it's going to have like a long-term impact on the industry, but do you see it having any sort of shorter term within like 3 to 5 years kind of thing? Or are we thinking like this resource flock, because it has the potential to be ongoing and keep recording, it is a long-term thing that's just going to keep on building as it goes? Like, how do you kind of see that playing out short term?
I think when we think of genomics as a resource, we should acknowledge that any animal that has a performance record and a genotype provides a genomic reference for that trait. So if we look at, say, weaning weight, post-weaning weight, which are highly recorded, any animal on a commercial farm that is recorded for post-weaning weight and has a genotype is contributing to that genomic reference. So, you know, as traits become more easier for producers, the genomic reference is driven by producers, not the resource flock. So that's why the resource flock evolves and new traits come on board, or unknown genetics get incorporated and those sort of things. So that continues on, and realistically, the resource flock is used as a way to make sure that we have the reference that meets the evolution of industry. And so sometimes it could shrink, it could increase, you know, that sort of thing. But it needs to be going the whole time. I don't see us being in a position where in, say, 15, 20 years where you just go, no one needs to performance record again. Yeah. Because what's that saying is that you believe that any animal that's bred or any combination of genes is, we've captured them all. We're never going to see a new one. And so I always think, you know, breeders do great things. What they've done, how animals have improved production-wise, would indicate that the industry will change and evolve, and new combinations of genes will appear. And so, you know, that's what breeding is. It's finding a better animal. So the reference needs to keep going. So that long term, it's always just going to help improve the accuracy of our breeding decisions across everything. That's the simplest form. In regards to short-term outputs, and what we are really focusing on in the new projects we're developing is providing better genomic tools for the commercial breeder and predictions. And I guess going back to this repro thing, the bit that we've never really been able to capture is how does a commercial first cross ewe breeder get a genomic prediction of how well his ewe's performing? Because that animal has captured some genes from a merino, traditionally, and the other half from a maternal breed. And those two animals at the moment currently exist in two different genetic evaluations. So how do you bring them together? How do you decide what's come from each side? And how do you give a prediction of how that will perform? And then more importantly, how do you give a prediction of how the lambs from that first cross will perform once a terminal is brought into the situation as well? So that second cross lamb, because that's what you're predicting. You want to predict not only how a first cross ewe will perform reproductively and on farm, but then how will her progeny perform as a lamb going into the slaughter.
Yeah,
market. That is our hope, and we've shown the principles work through flock profile and merino, so we know we can do it. It's just having the data where we have maternal genetics run alongside merino genetics, so you can benchmark the two of them against each other, and that's why we've gone down the pathway of bringing repro back into the resource flock again. We're going to have merinos and first cross merinos and maternal ewes running alongside each other.
Yeah, right. Yeah, that sounds like so much work, Sam. It sounds like, there's a heap of work going into that, and it's going to be really, really beneficial for industry, especially at a level where it actually represents what's happening out there in the paddock and not just, here's what we think. Yeah, that seems really, really cool.
It is quite daunting now that I've had to say that.
You've got it out in the open now.
But I mean, that's our long-term goal, is to basically provide people with better tools to make better selection decisions. And how they utilise the tools is up to them. They can get fully into it and use everything available. They use parts, but we're making sure that decisions to do stuff isn't hindered because it doesn't exist yet.
Okay.
And if we can, that tool does it. Okay, well, I'll take advantage of it.
Yeah.
That's what we'd like to do. That's a philosophy I hope we're trying to
it sounds
express.
Like it. Yeah, absolutely.
Just making sure that whatever decisions they make, they can utilise as much information as possible.
Absolutely. Well, I was just going to actually ask you, what do you see the future of genetics being like in 10 years' time, if you could have a look into a crystal ball per se?
Yeah, it's a very good question, where you see yourself in 10 years. It's a hard one in genetics because if you think about it, that's really only 2 selection decisions worth of generations.
Well, maybe I should rephrase to 20 years then.
10 years, if the average ewe stays in the flock till it's 6, we've only really shifted maybe 1 to 2 generations of the national flock in 10 years. Of course, there's lots of decisions along the way, but so in genetics, 10 years is maybe not very long, but as a researcher, 10 years is quite a long time. That's the time I've been in Armidale again. So if I was all the time I've been here, and on that philosophy that you'd hope that you can provide maybe 3 or 4 new ways for people to interact with the genetic tools available and make better breeding decisions. I think genomics is, the utilisation of genomic information is still quite in the infancy. I know we're seeing huge numbers of breeders using genomics and getting information from it, but I still think we haven't really truly taken full advantage of that technology. So I think in the next 10 years we'll have much better understanding of how to really maximise your returns from that investment. I think consequently we'll have better predictions. I think new traits in regards to methane, sustainability, welfare are going to be hugely valuable. How they sit in the breeding objective, I don't know. I don't know if that's going to become the breeding objective, but production traits are always important. But I think most people can agree that we're getting pretty close to some pretty good production levels. We can always improve them, don't get me wrong, but do we need cows to be bigger, growing faster, or are we happy that they deliver a calf to slaughter as a steer at this age? In lambs, do we really need to have them slaughtered any earlier? Is it now a point of we've got them to a performance level that we're happy with, and now we just want to improve all the inputs, not so much the outputs? Or I don't know. It's really an open thing, like you can see around the world that there's sort of now starting to become outside pressures on regards to license to produce. And, if you can say, look, I have 1% mortality instead of 5, or whatever, to me, that suddenly becomes appealing to other people. I think there was a great talk by at AGBU about this shifting in breeding objectives and maybe bringing more stuff like methane, welfare, sustainability characteristics into a breeding objective. And it said, don't take me on board, but if war comes along, it doesn't matter. Well, of course it doesn't, because then it becomes we just need to produce more and more to satisfy demand. And war's not a good word to use, but like if suddenly we need to produce twice as much lamb meat or twice as much beef, then issues around social license and those sort of things become less. People don't, you see them go to the supermarket, they'll go buy the cheap meat when times are tough, and they want meat, they still want meat. But when times are good, maybe they're willing to go buy the artificial meat for twice as much. And so the question is, as society becomes better, more comfortable, maybe we expect more from our production systems than just to produce red meat. This is a big question.
Yeah, that is some really interesting
again,
insight.
It always comes back to whether we need to do it now or in the future. Are we in a position that in the future, if this becomes an issue, we can do something about it? And you can look at meat traits as a really good indication. When Lamb Plan came around, the focus was on fast-growing lambs that produce big carcasses because everyone wants more lamb, more chops. Over time, we started to realise that was unbeneficial to eating quality. And, still not paid in most processing plants for eating quality. But slowly we saw people start to join the resource block, get an understanding of it, slowly shift their breeding objective to just, okay, I'm not going to ruin it. And then, maybe I'll just keep improving it. Still not getting paid for it. And now you can see places like Gundagai with a price grid that is driven utilising IMF. And we see sheep breeders who are producing a marketable product on IMF and getting reward for that. And, 5-10 years ago, if we made that conversation, everyone would say, well, I'm not paid for it. Why should I worry about it? Some people thought, hang on, maybe I should. And slowly, surely, you have that tool. And now there's breeders and most sheep producers are still not getting paid on IMF, but they know they have a tool there. It's not, I can't do anything about it.
It's available.
I don't think I need to do that yet. I have a tool there. And I think the philosophy from a research point of view and our leading breeders or whatever is what are the things that in the future might be important to me, or I want to make sure I'm not making this a problem in the future, because the worst thing to do would be to breed for a more productive animal that has really bad longevity, for example. So, or grows really bad foot structure, or so by accident you're creating a problem that you didn't know about. And the beauty of quantitative genetics is if you can record it, you can probably select for it. It's sometimes you're just getting data and getting an understanding, and it's not part of your breeding objective. But
you never know when you might need it or use it. Or
and so like that question of 10 years is, I don't know. We could be anywhere. We could. Hopefully, I'm still got a job in quantitative genetics and still learning and answering new questions. But I really don't. Yeah. We could be taken anywhere, and sometimes you get taken places you had no idea you were going to go because the pressures pop up. And sometimes you like it, sometimes you don't. But
you just got to go with it.
We've got to make sure that outside forces, whatever they put onto the industry, especially around methane, it's a really good case that we're likely to get pressure from outside the industry to do something. And the worst place we want to be in is where we can't show that we can't do it. If we show that we can't do anything about it. If you come back, if they say, we need to do this, and you go, well, this is what we could do, you can resolve it. But I don't know, I hate the we can't do attitude. So
absolutely,
we've got to make sure that story is never part of the industries. We can get there. Let's give it a go and let's move.
Yeah,
whatever
you've got
the
the
problem
tools and
is.
options available.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
make sure that the industry can make a choice.
I love that. That's very insightful, Sam. I feel like I'm going to have to book in a 10-year appointment from now and be like, we need to come back and discuss. Because, that was really, really interesting to see what you think it's going to look like, or some things that might even just pop up. But I love to hear that, you find it nice that people have the option, even if we don't need it right now. In the future, it's there if you need it. Because I think that is, it's safe and it's comfortable, and it's like preparing, because you just never know what direction anything's going to go in, right? So I think that's really, really a nice message. I
think whatever you're doing, we can all agree that when we prepare ourselves for the challenge ahead, we do better.
Absolutely.
And I agree. Sometimes we hear things and it's daunting, and you're like, I don't want to have to deal with that. Why should I have to deal with it? Well, that's a choice not to deal with it. But the worst place to be is, why do I have to deal with it now? Oh, I better deal with it. I can't do anything about it. Whereas, okay, I'll deal with that in the future, but this is what I'll do to make sure that in the future, when I need to deal with it, I'm ready to do it. And I think as an industry, that we need to do that, and as individuals, we need to do that as well.
Yeah. So true. Well, I think that's a really nice way to wrap up this episode. I love the message at the end. I think is just fantastic, and giving people the option is always better than having no option. And I think that's a really nice overarching message. So thank you so much, Sam, for taking some time out of your day to have a chat with me. It's been awesome to hear about some of the work that's coming up, and it sounds like it's going to benefit industry a lot, and I'm really excited to see where it goes.
Thanks. It's nice to finally take our conversations into an actual podcast.
Absolutely, we did it. We got there.
Yeah, it's great, and thanks for having me.
Awesome. Thanks, Sam. Thank you for tuning into this episode of Genetics in the Paddock with Emily, a podcast produced by the extensive livestock genetics team within New South Wales DPI. We hope you've enjoyed this deep dive into the world of genetics and its impact on livestock production. If you found this episode informative and engaging, please consider subscribing to the podcast and leaving a review. Your feedback is essential in helping me to continue to bring you valuable content on livestock genetics. If you have any questions, comments, or suggestions for future topics or guests, please don't hesitate to reach out to me on social media or through email. We love hearing from our listeners and are always eager to explore the subjects that matter most to you.